Hello, and welcome to the Elevate Your Running podcast. This is your host, Coach Sarah, and I'm here today with a guest. We have Alex Larson, who is a registered dietitian on the podcast today. Hey, Alex, how's it going?
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for having me today. I'm so excited.
I am so excited to have you here. And today we're going to talk all about how to fuel after your goal race or after a race. And this is going to be, I think, really crucial, at least right now in the spring and of course in the fall. Like, how can we support your post race recovery to help your body feel that it's repairing itself in the way that we want it to repair? And also, how does that impact your next race? So, we're going to talk all about that today. But before we begin, Alex, I'd love for you to introduce yourself to the Elevate Your Running audience.
Yeah, hello everyone. As Sarah said, I'm a registered dietitian. I have been a dietitian since 2010, and that was right around the time that I actually started my own endurance athlete journey as well. I formerly was like a horseback rider. I showed horses a lot, and then I transitioned into triathlons right around the time that I finished college and started my career. And I really got hooked on that sport. Next thing I knew, 2014, I was doing Ironman Wisconsin, and that was a huge undertaking because not only did I train for that race, but I also moved, changed jobs, and I got married that summer. It was a bit of a whirlwind. So at that point, my goal with the race was just to finish. I had like no time goal whatsoever other than like the 17-hour cutoff. And it was such an adventure. But what I remember so specifically about that race was that marathon was a war zone with athletes, sitting on the sideline crying with cramping, vomiting, like fatigue, hitting the wall, like all of the above. And I just remember thinking as I crossed the finish line, oh my gosh, if I didn't know what I was doing with my nutrition, I don't know if I would have much less gotten to the start line or the finish line. And that was a huge moment for me where sports nutrition wasn't really on my radar for something to do as a career, but that was kind of that pivotal moment where I said, I feel like I need to help my people. This is kind of my calling. And so a few years later, I started Alex Larson Nutrition, and now I get to work with endurance athletes from all over the world, runners, cyclists, triathletes, cross-country skiers. It's just the best to be able to support this amazing community and help them feel their best, not only in their training, but outside their training as well, so that they can be really productive, energetic humans, no matter how far they're running in a day. That's kind of been my journey. And then for myself as a runner, I've always kind of included running, sometimes competitively, sometimes just for fun. I've got 3 young kids, and I truly own like 3 or 4 different running strollers in my garage, but they have so much dust on them because it is mom's time to go and run with her friends or by herself. So I don't even use a jogging stroller and bring my kids along because it's part of my me time. It's a special time for me.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people can relate to that, whether they have kids or maybe it's a demanding, stressful like work life or maybe both. And running kind of gives us that opportunity to either reconnect with ourselves, have that self-care time, or connect with our friends. And that's always a
Yes.
really fun part of the day.
Yeah. Anytime I see a woman that's my age that's running, I like try and slowly, slyly stalk them a little bit. Like, who is that? Could I possibly run with them? Like, trying to learn who they are and introduce myself, because I'm always trying to find like mom friends that I can run with.
Yeah, especially I think if you're running around the same time of the
Yes.
day every
Mm-hmm.
day, I think that's actually that's a great idea. Kind of lean into the people who are running around you and maybe you can form your own running club.
Yeah, love that.
One more thing to do.
I know I'm just this creepy woman like staring at runners. Like I'm like, I swear, I just want to know if I can run with you. I just need a friend.
Well, I loved your intro because I laughed a little bit when you were talking about your triathlon days and how you were kind of like looking around and it was like this war zone because I remember very, very distinctly after I crossed the finish line to my first marathon, I felt the same way. Now, I was in no way, shape, or form in good condition. Like, I just want to be clear about that. But there were people like on the ground in like significant pain, people getting sick, people looking so disheveled and so unwell. And
Yes.
I thought,
Getting carted to the med tent.
yeah, like, oh my gosh, is this marathoning? I was in so much, I think, disbelief that there were all these people feeling this way after running 26.2 miles. And what I loved about what you said is that it doesn't have to be this way. Like, we can train and train well and maybe train long, no matter how much we're running in a given day or movement or exercise. Um, no matter how much we're doing in a day, we should still be able to feel energized and upbeat
Yeah.
and be able to live our life. And we shouldn't be under this like cloud of fatigue or feeling like we can't do anything else. So,
Yeah. And I mean,
um,
I think regardless of if you run a 2.5 hour marathon or if you run a 5.5 hour marathon, you are
mhm,
worthy of fueling yourself really well
mhm.
and making that a priority, because it doesn't just impact your athletic performance, but it also impacts your health, your, like you said, your energy levels in your day. So it's like if you're going to go for your long run on the weekend and the rest of the day you are comatose on the couch, like exhausted, a zombie, can't get up and function and can't play with your kids, I'm like, that's a problem that we could fix.
Absolutely. And it can be a really easy fix too.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So
It can depend on the person, certainly, but yeah, a
yeah.
lot of times can be some really simple, easy changes that make just a world of a difference.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about those changes today. And this is going to
Hmm.
be actually applied to after you're racing. Now, you can take what Alex says today and possibly apply it to your training and what you're doing in the weeks leading up to your race. But I want everyone listening today to think about you have just crossed the finish line to, let's say, your spring race,
Hmm.
right? And you fueled, you hydrated during this race, and it could be the half marathon, it could be a marathon, it could be an ultra distance. For today's conversation, we're going to be leaning into more of the longer endurance races because those seem to do the most or more damage to our
Yeah,
body.
they're very stressful in the body. The longer you're going, the more stress in the body, and the more we need to prioritize nutrition. That's exactly how we want to think about it.
Yeah, yeah. So I want everyone to think about, okay, so you've trained for 12, 16, maybe 20 weeks. You have just completed your A goal race of the season. You have stopped the smartwatch, you've saved it. You have a smile on your face. The medal's being put over your head and across your chest and you're wearing it proudly.
And
Let's talk about what happens.
you're handed a water bottle usually. Like I'm thinking of, like, so I live in Duluth, or just outside of Duluth, Minnesota, which is home to Grandma's Marathon. So yeah, when you finish a marathon, they hand you a water bottle, and then typically you head towards some sort of hopefully a buffet of options in the post race food. Usually there's some sort of fruit like banana,
Mhm.
granola bars, maybe like usually there'll be some sort of like protein drink, milk, like chocolate milk you'll see there. There's usually quite a few different options. So there's three/4 areas where I look for. One is obviously going to be rehydration, especially if it's a more um, warmer, more humid race. Maybe you're someone that lives more the northern climate like I do, and you're going to do a race down in the southern end where it's
Mm.
going to be a lot warmer and more humid. Or even if you're heading to a race that's at elevation, you're going to be losing hydration a lot more in that dry, high altitude air. Or just unseasonably warm. Like Boston is coming up here. It is a crapshoot. You could be really, really warm, or it could be, pretty chilly. You kind of just have to be prepared for all sorts of different things. And so
Mhm.
if it is on the warmer end, you do want to make sure that you are starting to replenish those lost fluids, because we can end up usually fairly dehydrated when we finish a race. And with that, you want to replenish your electrolytes as well. Mainly sodium is the big one. And so if there's potato chips at the
Mm.
post-race buffet, then those are like my favorite things to grab, is just regular potato chips, because they're salty. For some reason, they are the best tasting chips in the world, like after a hard race. So that's a good way to get some sodium just through the food that's offered. Or if you have like a post-race bag with maybe a change of clothes. You could throw some electrolyte packets in there too if you are kind of particular about the type of electrolytes you like to grab. That's a really great option, is to kind of have some post-workout or post-race snacks in that bag. A couple things that I like to grab is maybe like those cereal cups that are like you get usually like in elementary school at breakfast.
Yeah.
Those can work really well, something really simple. And then maybe like a Core Power, those like Fairlife Core Power drinks. Actually, those
Hmm.
mixed in with cereal is one of my team and I's favorite post recovery run me like little snack, is just some Core Power with some really like simple like Cheerios or Rice Krispies or something like that. So that's where we usually look for that rehydration and electrolytes first, especially if it's going to be a warmer race, and then looking for those carbohydrates to start refueling those muscles, because they're going to be very tired and their favorite form of energy is going to be carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are your
Mm.
friend. And then pairing it with some protein to start that recovery process, because once your muscles get fed, they're going to be ready to rebuild. It's nice to have some fresh protein available during that time.
Yeah, I agree with all of this. And I made a little like silent comment to Alex as she was talking because she maybe Alex, you've been in my kitchen. So I love the multigrain Cheerios, and I'm a gluten-free runner and I have a gluten sensitivity. So the multigrain Cheerios are great with the Core Power vanilla as like
Mm-hmm.
the milk. That is such a great refuel meal or snack, however you want to position it. And sometimes I'll even have it if I'm in like a really big training cycle. And now we're kind of pulling this back into the training. But I think what you're going to, I think, realize for the listeners in this episode is that everything that we're doing post race are things that you can apply in training.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah, and I really love sometimes at night if I'm training a lot and I want to have a little bit of extra before I go to bed to make sure I get really great sleep and I'm not waking up hungry. And I'm really like repairing as best I can. I'll have that kind of for like an after dinner snack, which is awesome. And I'm a big believer. I love like throwing in like an element packet or an electrolyte packet in the drop bag. I think that that's probably an item on my athlete list that I haven't added. Like, let's bring extra electrolytes for right after the race. For an athlete who's maybe walking through that post race buffet of food and snacks,
We'll just call it a
um,
buffet. Hopefully,
yeah,
it's a buffet.
hopefully it's a buffet. How many carbohydrates and protein and grams of protein should these athletes be kind of looking at to consume within like that golden hour, that first hour after completing a race?
Yeah. And let me just back up. The guidelines that we're talking about today, I think, apply very well to post training runs as well.
Mhm.
And honestly, those are excellent times to practice this, of feeling like what tastes best for you, what feels great for you post workout, post race. And also, I say this all the time to athletes, like your recovery after your training is just as important as the training itself, because
Mhm.
we're running so frequently throughout the week that you have to think of like getting in that nutrition as soon as possible so that your muscles can bounce back faster, so that you're ready for the next training session. And especially if you're maybe doing 2-a-days, it becomes even more important as well. So just thinking
Mhm.
of that, we talked about the golden hour, that 45 to 60-minute window after you get done with a workout or you get done with a race. You're not going to have a very great appetite typically, just because exercise will often suppress appetite. So even if you are not super hungry, have something, like I said, that Core Power works really great. It doesn't have a lot of carbs in it. That's why we pair it with the cereal. If you have to add some carbs maybe to your water bottle, you could do like a Tailwind or a Scratch Labs, like some of those hydration mixes that have both electrolytes and carbs in it. Some way for you to get in your nutrition is better than nothing at all. I think that's really important for people to kind of think like, I got to get something in, even if it's just straight up sugar in my bottle. That's going to be better than nothing at all, because you want to think about bouncing back faster, having less soreness later on, less fatigue is kind of the mindset that I like to be in. So in terms of amounts, you hear about like a 3-to-1, 4-to-1 ratio of carbs to protein.
Mhm.
With that kind of post-race snack, honestly, you could have anywhere from like 10 to 20 grams of protein just to get yourself started. And with that, 3-to-1, 4-to-1 ratio, you're looking at like 60 to 80 grams of carbs somewhere in there, which would be like a bagel. Honestly, like it could be something as simple as that. That'd be your snack. And then within, I would say there's another like golden time frame in my mind, and that's within that 2 hour window trying to have a meal. For some people, this sounds like the worst thing in the world. It doesn't have to be anything super extensive. It could be a very light meal, or something as simple as like some soup and a baguette, like something like that. But that's really important to get that meal in. If you don't get it in, you usually will start to feel almost kind of sick, kind of ill. Like
Mhm.
you just want to go curl up in a ball and fall asleep, kind of thing. I've had that myself where I get done with a long run and then my kids just distract me. And next thing you know, like blink of an eye, 2 hours went by and then I just feel really poorly. I'm like, oh, shoot, I might do this for a living, but I messed this up. And now I have to try and like bounce back and recover from this. And so having a meal within a couple hours, I feel like is really important for people to kind of just have that window to just get in some sort of light meal. Nothing super heavy. I wouldn't go and have like a burger and fries or any like deep fried foods. I would go for something kind of light, but just some sort of meal. A good example would be last year, Grandma's Marathon weekend was pretty chilly and a little rainy. And my mom was hosting a couple people from the cities that did the half marathon. And when they finally got back home to my parents' house, my mom had a whole like lunch prepared for them. And they were like, oh, we're not really feeling real great. And like, we're not really hungry. And she's like, nope, my daughter said that you guys have to have some sort of meal within 2 hours after you finish your race. Like, please eat something. And then as they started to eat and they finished and they're like, oh, actually, we do feel a lot better now. And so just, she had like some soup for them and some fruit and some like just a nice little like lunch spread. And they felt so much better after that.
Yeah, and I think that that's such a great example of listening to your body cues too as a runner. And you can do this in training of how do you feel if you're fueling well or fueling quickly after a training run? And how are you feeling if you maybe misstep and get kind of caught up with life and all of a sudden you realize 2 hours later you haven't consumed anything and you start to feel that really fast crash that happens?
It's
Like,
miserable. It's
it's
miserable.
miserable.
But I think we've all probably experiencing just like, oh, I feel so awful. And then I'm like, oh shoot, that was my own doing. Like you just get
Yeah.
distracted. So you have to stay focused with like taking care of yourself and you'll be so much happier that you did.
Yeah, and like we're all humans, we're all bound to make these missteps for sure. I think one of a one of the things to really lean into is if you're listening to this and you're racing here in the next few weeks, or maybe you're listening to this and you have a big fall race coming up, is adding this into your planning. So having maybe an idea of what you want to eat after your race, or finding a restaurant, or I love like smoothies after a warmer marathon because usually my stomach is turned all upside down, and the carbohydrates are really difficult to take in after a race. It's like, oh, I've had so many gels. I can't even think about eating anything like that, but a smoothie is tricky because it's like very sneaky because I think it just adds in the carb to protein ratio that you maybe want within that very short window of time, but it doesn't feel like you're eating or consuming something that is difficult to get down. You know, usually you're thirsty after a marathon or thirsty after a race. So that's kind of a one of my go-tos. But I think planning that out in advance is huge because how many of us after a race finish a race, we're seeing our friends, our family, and that is really the last thing that we're thinking of is like where to go. Maybe you're living, or maybe you don't live there and you're visiting from out of town. So having a place to go, or having things back in your hotel room, I think will be really beneficial.
Yeah, if your hotel room has like a fridge or something, like give yourself an options there to just go back to your room and eat something, so you don't have to try and find a restaurant that has an opening for you to sit down and eat something.
Yeah, yeah, that's great advice. Um, For the runner that maybe has more of that like upset stomach, they're not feeling hungry, what are, I just mentioned a smoothie. You mentioned kind of like that lighter meal, maybe a little bit of a snack. Is there anything else that that runner could be focusing on to just trying to do their best to recover or start or jumpstart that recovery process? Because we know the faster we can start this recovery process, the faster we start to recover. And then hopefully the better we feel once we get back into running in the coming days or weeks.
Yeah, I would go for, like I said, when if you have more of a sensitive stomach, the lighter meals will definitely be the go-to. When I think of that, I would think of like maybe stopping by like an Asian restaurant with like something more rice based, and then you can do a little bit of vegetables, a little bit of meat, like nothing like no fried, like what's that one? My husband always gets it with like the fried chicken on it, but like something that's more of a grilled meat with like a salty sauce on there with some veggies would probably be a little bit more lighter.
Mm.
I wouldn't go crazy with the quantity, but I would maybe have like half of it and then save the another half for later in the day. Or you could stop by like a Whole Foods. A lot of times they'll have like a vegetarian sushi.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that can work really well. So there's lots of different options. Just thinking of like, okay, what is my stomach going to tolerate post race? Something kind of light, nothing deep fried, nothing super high in fat. A little bit of protein would be great in there. Just but anything is better than nothing. I think that's really important for people to understand. Or you could do like some tart cherry juice. There's actually really great research on the polyphenols and the micronutrients in tart cherry juice is really helpful for post race, like reducing muscle soreness. You could even have some of that available to drink throughout the rest of the day. That tartness is kind of, even though it's sweet, that tartness is kind of a little bit different flavor profile. After, like you said, gels and chews for a few hours, you get tired of it pretty quick. And especially if you carb loaded properly for a couple days in advance, like you just don't even want to think about sugar for a few days. That's how I was last week. I was at a gravel bike camp for 3 days. So I carb loaded the first day and then I rode for 3 days. And by the time I left on Sunday, I was like, oh my God, I do not want to look at like sugar for the next like 48 hours. So I think we went up for sushi that last night because I was like, I just need straight up savory and salty.
Oh, yeah, that sounds lovely. And I think so many runners can relate to that, or even like the bread consumption after a race. Like, at least for me, I'm not usually like jonesing for a piece of bread. I'm like, I've had enough in the
Yes.
carbo load. I really just want, some different foods and a variety of foods, lighter foods. I love the veggie sushi. I think that's a great, great, great idea. Keeping things light, keeping it fun, and at
Or like
least,
a Panera bread where you can do like a soup and salad, like something
yeah.
like that. You could put some chicken on the salad, like something where you're going to get some variety and some nice micronutrients would be great.
Yeah. What do you say to the runner? Because I know there are runners out there like this, and I'm coaching a few right now who say, I feel better when I run fasted,
Oh,
and may also not fuel after a run. And so we're going to apply like the training. I'm assuming how they show up in training is how they also show up on race day. And if that's the case, what's kind of your advice to that runner who maybe doesn't want to refuel after a race or, kind of post training run?
I just can't relate to that person. That just sounds like the worst. Sounds like torture. But for those
Mhm.
that say that, usually it has something to do with a goal of like weight loss, of like
Mhm.
fear of like weight gain, especially because a lot of those foods that you would fuel with before and after would be like sugar or carb based. Um, they've done research on like fasted workouts. They've done lots of research on fueled workouts. There really is no evidence that it's superior in like improving performance doing your fasted workout. If anything, it's putting you at risk for hitting a wall and bonking during that workout or race. Um, I think where people say that they might feel a little better might be more of like an GI standpoint because their stomach would be empty and therefore
Mhm.
they would be less likely to have a need to go have a bowel movement during that workout, because usually like when we eat something that kind of signals our body like, hey, we gotta start transiting things along here because we have to make room for what's
Yeah.
coming. And so you have to really time out. If you're going to have a meal before your run, give yourself at least an hour to digest that and allow your body to go to the bathroom before starting that run. But really, fueling before workouts is there to enhance the workout itself. So it gives you some fresh energy in your bloodstream that's going to spare the glycogen that's in your muscles at that time, help you go farther for longer without fatiguing. Um, for me, I think that it's already stressful enough to do this running and training on our body.
Hmm.
To do it without the proper fuel just adds exponential more stress on the body. And for me, all of that stress over and over and over is where we see injuries start coming into play. And so anytime that we can fuel our body really well and support it to do the workouts that our coach prescribes us, and being able to do them well, that nutrition is just a huge part of that.
Yeah. Do you find that the recovery process is harder or longer for that athlete who doesn't want to fuel
Absolutely.
during the race or the training run?
Absolutely. I find
Mhm.
that it just puts you in this massive energy deficit the rest of the day, and it's really hard to catch back up. And what often happens is people will finally feel hungry in the evening. They'll have massive sugar cravings. They will have this kind of uncontrolled, ravenous hunger where no matter how much they eat or what they eat, they're just still kind of mildly hungry. And if you're
Mhm.
someone that experiences that in your day to day with your nutrition, then it's time to really look at one, how you're fueling around that workout itself, and two, making sure that you're eating enough earlier on in the day. Usually people aren't getting a big enough breakfast or a big enough lunch, and then they just go into the evening in this massive deficit, and their body's like, we got to catch up on this. And that's where we see kind of the binge eating in the evenings.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that is hopefully enough information for those athletes who are maybe not fueling before or during a race, or of course in your training, or if you're noticing that you're hungry mid race. That's, I think, also another big like red flag that the body isn't fueled properly for that effort. And knowing that you're just digging yourself into a hole that's going to take a little bit longer or maybe a lot longer to dig yourself out of. And that's never a good thing when we're coming off of a longer endurance effort, because they take a long time to recover anyways. So we
Yeah.
might as well get to jumpstart the recovery
If
process.
you're someone that notices that you're frequently injured, you're having to take extra rest days, if you're just not nailing your workouts really well, if you are someone that's just a zombie the rest of the day after your workouts, you're having to rely on a lot of caffeine to get yourself through the day. If you are someone that isn't sleeping well, all of that stress on the body can impact sleep. There's a laundry list of common underfueling symptoms that dietitians like myself see that we're like, oh, we can fix this. Like, but you have to put in the work and be willing to trust the process. That nutrition
Mhm.
can really solve a lot of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Now let's transition into the next like 24 to 48 hours. So
Yes.
maybe you drive home from the race or you fly home, whether it's later that day or the next day. Recovery doesn't stop in that first hour. Very, very similar to training, like how we support our bodies with fuel throughout the rest of the day is so much of a big impact on how we're going to feel the next day and how we're going to feel in the coming days. So what should runners focus on over these next 1 to 2 days following a race to continue supporting the muscle repair and reducing that inflammation?
Yeah, and I think everyone's a little bit different in how they feel in that kind of 24 to 48 hours. Some people will have a ravenous appetite, and some people will have like
Mhm.
no appetite at all. And I find that just interesting how everyone kind of differs. I'd be prepared for either or maybe you just feel you bounce back really fast and normal. Maybe you're really well trained, or you're a well seasoned marathoner and you're bouncing back really quickly. But usually, I say, okay, let's try and stick to kind of a normal eating schedule. And if wake up, have a breakfast. Depending on how long you're going between breakfast and lunch, maybe you have a snack. But then just making sure that your meals are balanced with. For me, a meal should include protein, carbohydrates, a little bit of healthy fat, some micronutrients with some fruit and or vegetables. Having that balanced meal is going to provide you that variety of nutrition to continuously supplying that to your body so it can help recover, help bounce back faster. And doing that breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks as needed if you're going, more than 4 or 5 hours between meals. Making sure that you're just supplying that consistent nutrition is really helpful while also staying hydrated. Those are the things that I think are the foundation to consistently doing to helping yourself recover faster. And the longer the race, the longer it's going to take to recover. If you're doing a half marathon, probably a day, maybe two. If you're doing a marathon, probably 3, 4, 5 days, depending on how challenging the marathon was for you. And then ultra distance races, you're looking at probably multiple weeks to really, truly fully recover and bounce back from those. The other thing you could look at would be some supplements. If you're finding when you're traveling, it's hard to do getting enough protein, you can make sure you do like I said, those core power drinks or like a protein powder, bringing that with a blender bottle. When I went to that, I traveled to Oregon for that camp I was talking about. So I actually shipped out in advance all of my sports fuel, and I also included my protein powder with that in little baggies. So I would just bring my blender bottle and whip up like a post recovery drink for myself after the race. And same thing with the morning I was traveling back home. I made sure to get a good dose of protein and to start out the day. And those types of things are really, those little details can make such a huge impact on how you feel post race. And it's going to make you want to return back to training and racing again so much faster.
Absolutely. Do you feel like there is a certain type of macro distribution between the protein and the carbs that an athlete should be focusing on over those first few days?
Well, with protein, we recommend it's kind of by body weight. 1.5 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight is the typical recommendation. So somewhere in that range, I think would be adequate. With carbohydrates, you could start out like in terms of like percentages of calories, from like 45 to 55, somewhere in there. Again, depending on kind of, if you're an ultra runner, you might want to be more like 55, 60%. Somewhere in that range. Again, it's hard for me to give a recommendation just because nutrition is such an individualized thing. And then with fat, usually it's like 0.8 to 1 grams of fat per kilogram body weight.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think that the broader message is to not either eliminate or significantly reduce a macro, because I know of athletes who've gone through their race in the next few days, they're really focusing on protein and veggies, and they're maybe pulling out the carbohydrates because they're not in that movement schedule, but the carbohydrates are still equally as important to continue the repair
Yeah,
and
those
providing
glycogen
energy.
stores will take many hours, if not days, to reload those glycogen stores. It's not like an instantaneous
Yeah.
thing. And I think the other thing that runners can be concerned about is post race. If they weigh themselves, they'll notice that they might be up a few pounds. Honestly, it's just water weight. It's inflammation. It's going to come back down. You have to trust the process. But part of
Mhm.
that recovery process and bringing that inflammation down is nourishing yourself. And so don't weigh yourself in those days after the race. Just let yourself come back down and heal. And you're very likely to come back down to your baseline weight.
Yeah, that's great advice. There's many of us that experience that delayed onset soreness. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I know after I run marathons, it's usually, let's say I run a marathon on a Sunday, it's like Tuesday is like the worst day, and
Yeah,
then it starts to
agreed.
feel a little bit better on
Yeah, like
on
Monday I'll be
Wednesday.
sort of sore, but then Tuesday it's like everything just becomes stiff, and you get out of bed, you're like, oh, and so like usually it's like the day goes on, it gets a little bit better as you like move. But yes, I agree. Like Tuesday's always the worst for me too.
Yeah. So for those runners who kind of experience that delayed onset soreness, muscle soreness, we've talked about the cherry juice, but are there other types of foods or nutrients or different supplements that a runner could take to help reduce or minimize that that inflammation and also just promote that faster recovery?
Yeah, one thing too would be like omega-3 fats, doing
Mm,
maybe some salmon or fish or like a fish oil supplement. Flaxseed, those will have some omega-3s in there as well.
great.
Well researched for reducing inflammation. It's not going to be like a miraculously instantaneous thing as soon as you have some salmon, but it's like those little
Mm.
things that can make a big difference in just the long term in terms of muscle soreness. So that would be one area too, is just including some omega-3s in your diet as well is really helpful for reducing inflammation.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that's such an important note that a lot of these things that are recommended today are, you get the instantaneous kind of like energy. The recovery process starts once you start refueling right after the race. But some of these other things really are kind of in that 1% of like, it will help over the long term. You might not feel it right in the moment, but over the course of the next few days, and let's think a little bit on the longer term side, like when you start running again, how do you want to feel in those first few runs back? I think that all kind of makes a big difference on what you do in these critical few days following a race. Um, for sure. Cause I've been there on kind of both sides.
Yeah. And we hear a lot about like intuitive eating where you're like
Mm-hmm.
listening to your body and it's telling you what it needs. I do find that there has to be a level of intentional eating where it's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I'm not feeling super hungry, but it's been 4 or 5 hours since I've eaten, and maybe just all of the stress of the post race is really messing with my appetite. I'm going to still fuel myself. I'm not going to have like this massive meal and force myself to shovel down, huge quantities of food, but I'm going to have something here because it's been a while. I'm going to continue to supply my body with some protein, with some carbs, with some micronutrients, and being very intentional about that is really what's going to pay off in the long run.
Yeah, I think that's great advice because I think that's also something that athletes struggle with in training. You
Mm-hmm.
come, you finish like a hot long run and you're just not hungry at all. And then you might shift into life. And then it's several hours later and you're realizing, like, oh, maybe I should eat, but there's no intentionality around the hours in between the long run and when you start to refuel or that next meal. And I think it can get athletes in a really tricky space. It's very, very
Yeah.
tricky.
And it can get you in a really bad habit too. Like it has to be something that you're always working on. And it's we're not going to ever be perfect about it. You know what I mean? Like I
Yeah.
do this for a living and I'm not perfect about it. Like there's days where I'm like, oh, I should have done that differently. And so I'm like, okay, tomorrow I'm going to like make sure I do XYZ here and be on top of this and be intentional about it and
Yeah.
think this through. And we're not shooting for perfection here. I think it's important to think of it as a process. It's like, hey, maybe what you're hearing today, you're like, I'm not doing any of this. Like start with some of the easy stuff that I've said that you're like, I could do that or I can do this. Like start with one or two things and then build from there, because you don't have to go from 0 to 60 overnight. You can just start
Mm.
like little baby steps and progressively work yourself to a really nice consistency with your nutrition.
Yeah, that's really good advice because I think the nutrition side is really can be overwhelming for runners. Like
Mm-hmm.
we love running, we love training, we want to get faster, we want to get stronger, and we're not necessarily focused on the other things that can get us there, like strength training and nutrition. But if there is that a bit of intentionality around it and it becomes your process goal for the season, it's going to be so much easier for you as an athlete to focus on doing all these things in the best way that you possibly can post race so you can recover as quickly as possible. And it's not to say to start training again as quickly as possible, but just get the body ready to go. So when your mind is ready to go, you can start again. And it's not this yo-yo process after of like the mind's ready, the body's not, because of other recovery issues.
Yeah, I find with whether it's marathon training or whatever someone's training for, it when you're feeling terrible the workouts are suffering and you're struggling with them and like maybe you assign a workout for someone in the week and they maybe only nail one of the five runs, it's like that's really discouraging. But if we can dial in that nutrition so that you can nail every single workout that your coach prescribes you and you feel great, you are going to want to continue running. You're going to feel so much more confident going into your race. Be like, yeah, I got this. I nailed all of my workouts and I feel great. I'm not injured. I'm not going into this with like a sore IT band or, like worried about a stress fracture. Like those types of things
Mhm.
make running so much more enjoyable, and that's what it's supposed to be. We're supposed to love what we do, and I think if you feel great and you go into the run and into the race and you feel prepared and you have a great race, like it's going to make you want to sign up for another one and keep running.
Yeah, that's an excellent, excellent point. Like building that momentum, building that confidence, building the positive vibes, it all helps on race day. I've seen a lot of athletes as a coach, like if they're in this fun season of training and they go in happy and healthy and confident, typically they're running more relaxed, which is going to allow them to do something a little bit more special in that race than that athlete that's feeling fear or they're feeling scared or they're not feeling confident. They're feeling a lack of confidence. It all kind of impacts it all. It all works together
Yeah. Yeah.
for good or for bad.
Yeah. Like for me, if I look at a really hard workout, I'll be like, oh, I'm dreading this workout. Like, but if you can finish it feeling really good, like, oh, I could have actually probably gone farther or I could have gone harder there.
Mhm.
That mindset makes you so much more likely and be ready to do the next hard workout or like being ready for your race versus like if you finish a workout and you feel absolutely trashed and like, oh, that was so hard. I barely was able to do that. I think that mindset is something that we need to rewire in a lot of people. Because to them, they think I need to go all out and I need to feel terrible after. That's how I know it was a good workout. And I'm like,
Yeah.
nope. I want you to feel great at the end of that hard workout because that's going to
Uh-huh.
make you want to do the next one.
Yeah, like having another rep or two in the tank and
Mm-hmm.
not putting yourself in that hole, both physically and I think nutritionally as well. And like
Yeah.
really just making sure your workouts, the training, it's intentional, it's smart, it's all going to lead you into your race and your post-race recovery the way, hopefully that you want it to if you're
Yeah.
intentional with it.
Absolutely.
Are there foods, and I kind of even hate to ask this question, but like, are there foods that runners should avoid when we're going through this like post race recovery process? Is there anything that would maybe inhibit our recovery?
Alcohol.
Oh yeah, okay. So there
I
is
mean,
something.
well, yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, if we're gonna be honest here, I
I'm
mean,
not
I
a
would
heavy
say,
drinker,
yeah.
obviously.
I mean, I haven't had a drink in a few years, and if I did, I would be like under the table in a few sips, so it'd be really sad. But, um, yeah, like that would be the one where I'd be like, yep, that's the one that's going to do the most damage. I mean, I get it, like having a celebratory beer after weeks and weeks of training and then having
Yeah.
this big race. Like there's always a beer tent at the grandma's marathon where you get a free ticket and I end up handing my ticket off to someone else because I'm like, no, I'm not going to the beer tent. And so I get it. I really do. But I'm okay if someone's going to have a celebratory beer. I think I'd want to make sure, number one, they've been hydrating really well beforehand. They've had a meal. And I would stick to just one drink. And the other option is you could do those non-alcoholic drinks now. They make some really great NA beers,
Yeah.
and so you can still have like that celebratory vibe without the alcohol in there because it really will inhibit recovery. I mean, they've done research on it, so that would be the one area. I know people listen like, oh shoot, and maybe this doesn't deter them regardless, and that's fine. But that would be my one area to answer your question. I'd be like, alcohol is enough that would answer that.
Oh yeah, that makes sense for sure. I mean, how many times does for the listeners, like you have a glass of wine, you have a cocktail, maybe you go out and have a few, and then you notice your sleep isn't as good. And that's
Yes.
really the number one recovery tool. And I think for anyone who has run, I experience this significantly more when I run marathons versus race half marathons is my sleep quality is quite poor the night after the race. So if I race on a Sunday, the Sunday night going into Monday morning, I might squeak out 5 hours. Like it's just my adrenaline, I think, is just still so high from the race. It's really hard to
Mm-hmm.
sleep. And with sleep being the number one recovery tool, with I think nutrition right there and maybe the number two spot, I think it's really, really important to just be intentional with what you're choosing to do, how you're choosing to spend your time in these next few days after racing. And if you do want to celebrate your hard training cycle, all the hard work that you've put in, and celebrate with friends and family, it can still be after your race. But I think also maybe looking at later on in that week of doing something after you've kind of been through like those pivotal like 48 hours, and then really like have fun and celebrate your accomplishments.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, or if you're gonna have a beer, just have one, savor it,
Yeah,
and then continue back on with your recovery plan. I'm not gonna say that they can't have a celebratory drink, but it is going to dehydrate you and it is going to impact sleep. And so that's just my one little cautionary
definitely.
message to
Yeah.
those listening.
Yeah, for sure. And for longtime listeners, they might be thinking, oh, but Coach Sarah really loves her post race margarita. Now, this is true, but I usually only drink half to a third of it and then I'm done. It's like I just
Yeah.
need a few sips and then I'm like, "Oh, I can't actually do this cuz I do have a pretty sensitive stomach after racing."
Yeah.
And I
It's
just
one
need
of
to
those
focus.
things that sounds good, but then in the moment
Uh-huh.
you're like, oh, this actually isn't good.
100%. It's more about like the ordering and having it in front of you and maybe
Mm-hmm.
having like a quick cheers and a sip and then it's like, "Okay, I'm done." That's all I wanted. Um, all right, let's transition into like that long-term recovery aspect, and for that athlete who is maybe preparing for their next race, that athlete that has that race schedule for the next 12 months already lined up. They are, they have big goals and they want to continue training and racing. What does that kind of look like in terms of nutrition? Like how does that post race nutrition impact that long-term training and the training adaptations that kind of come with it?
Yeah. So you think of our exercise, that's the stress on the body. And then the adaptations are what come afterwards. And so we need
Yeah.
to make sure that we're like putting fuel in the tank so that we can really help the body adapt to get stronger, to get more fit, in all the different ways that it does that. And so, um, obviously a race is a lot of stress on the body typically, and so helping your body come back from that and adapt as well as possible so that when you start up that next training block, you're ready to go. You're not having any kind of like fatigue still left over where you're still like not not quite ready to get back into training. But yeah, having that kind of like thought process of like, okay, here's the training, I'm going to fuel this well, now I'm going to start the recovery process. I want to bounce back as quickly as possible from this run so that I'm ready to go for the next run, and being kind of in that cycle mindset. I find for myself as an athlete, I'm training for some gravel races this year. It's like I have to think of like, okay, depending on what time of the day I do my workout, and honestly, it's like any time of the day because with three kids, it could be morning, evening, middle of the day. And so I think, okay, here's where my workout is. I'm going to have my pre-workout fuel, or maybe part of my lunch here. I'm going to get my workout done. I'm going to fuel with some carbs during it, and I'm going to have a post ride lunch here and start that recovery process, and then make sure I have a really good dinner to again continue that recovery process, because I know the next day I'm going to get back on the bike, even if it's a recovery ride. I got to go into that feeling really strong. So thinking of it every day of like, how can I support myself throughout this training so that I can see the best fitness gains is how I go about it mentally for myself and for my athletes. And also warding off injuries. If you have like, it's okay to have like a little niggle of pain here and there where you're like, oh, what is that? But I'm like, okay, let's get on this like nutrition's train here and make sure I'm dial this in. And usually within a day or two, or if I have a rest day, my body will bounce back really well. And so thinking of it in that aspect of like, okay, the training is the stress, the nutrition is the adaptation, and that's where I'm going to see the biggest gains, and ward off injuries, I think is where people see the best benefit from it.
Yeah, and then they can absolutely go out and train and perform at all these future races. You could be an athlete who's like experiencing these ebb and flows to training. It's like if you are constantly needing to pull back or rest or pause training because of maybe niggles or nutrition imbalances, it's really hard to get ahead. It's really hard to continue trying to make gains in that area. But if you can really dial it in and be consistent with the nutrition aspect, and this is after your race, this is maybe going into a season before the season. This could be that maybe you just come off of running a marathon and you have your next marathon coming up in 9 months, but it's clearly way too long of a training cycle. There's no way that you're going to be training for your next marathon for 9 months, especially if you are someone who is consistent and you're training throughout the year. You're going to have the season before the season. And at least in my experience right now, I'm in the season before the season and I'm having a little bit of difficulty getting into it and being really intentional with every little piece of my training because it isn't what I'm really like my big goal is like running the best or fastest marathon I can. But right now I'm in a season of running 10Ks. And I'm finding that I'm not necessarily in it the way that I would be for a marathon prep. But over the last, actually, this is like quite coincidental, like over the last few days, talking with my coach about my nutrition and how that could be impacting my season before the season because my workouts aren't sharp. I'm just not quite there. And we're like, well, what the heck? So making sure that if you are kind of in this in between season or it's a season before the season of speed, that you're still working on the one percenters. You're still very, very intentional with your nutrition and what that looks like every single day, because it doesn't only just impact this season, but it is also going to impact your future seasons.
Yeah. And I think the when you were talking, I'm like, this is like nutrition periodization. It's like, what does your nutrition look like in the in season versus the off season versus the preseason, and dividing that out so that you can kind of categorize it. But I think it's important to also think of like, what's your foundation with your nutrition? That would be like, regardless of any season, where should your nutrition be at? It should be like having a structured meals throughout the day, right? It should be having some sort of like pre and post workout snack, regardless of if you're in season or off season. But then there's going to be varied levels of degrees of that. And so in the off season, I think some people are like, oh, I just need a break from training. I need a break from all of the focus. And then they're just will go like and eat whatever the heck they want. And then they notice like a little bit of off season weight gain. And then they're like trying to get back into that race weight situation, and it gets to be this like roller coaster. So it's like, if we can build a nice foundation and consistency that's easy for you to maintain no matter what period of training you're in, and then we can just adjust things based on that training volume, to me that makes the most sense, because it doesn't feel like you're in this constant state of work with your nutrition.
Yeah, that's a really strong point. Do you find that nutrition looks a little bit differently for that athlete who's coming off of a marathon season going into like a season of speed, knowing that they have another marathon on the other side of this season? Does it change at all or is it about the same?
I would look at kind of volume of training. If you're maybe doing a little bit more intense workouts, maybe some more intervals, then I would look at specifically how are we going to fuel that workout so that we can get the most out of those intervals. Because I find that people worry a little bit about taking in too much carbs for a shorter workout. Like, oh, I'm only working out an hour. Like, I don't need to take in a lot of carbs. And I'm like, well, you're going to be doing intervals. So usually it's that final interval where the wheels will kind of fall off, where you're going to start hitting the wall because you burn through so much glycogen in those initial ones because it was so intense that it's really glycogen dependent in those intervals. And so I'm like, no, we got to fuel with a good amount of carbs so that you can feel strong in every single interval and not go into this massive deficit when you're done, even though it was only a 60-minute workout versus like doing an endurance workout for like 2 hours. That's just at an easy effort, a little bit different, but still requiring glycogen. So,
Mm-hmm.
that's where we get a little bit more strategic with timing in terms of like shorter speed workouts. But you're putting yourself at a little bit more risk, I feel like, with injuries with those like really intense workouts. I feel like it's just as important to really nail that nutrition.
100%. Yeah, the intensity is high, which means there's a greater risk of something going wrong. And
Yeah.
yeah.
So, and I mean, I think of like a track workout. Like you have really nice like surfaces. Your likelihood of like rolling an ankle on a track is a lot less than if you were like running through the woods kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, you're pushing your body at different limits, and that's where I might even consider doing a little bit of collagen to help with like those ligaments and tendons that are going to get a little bit more stress on them in those intense um, like speed workouts.
Yeah, I love that. And that kind of segues into one of the last questions for today's episode. I was thinking about this as we were talking today. Like, what is kind of like your take on the craze around like creatine? And I know we
Mm,
already talked about tart cherry juice and
yeah.
ketones in recovery. Do you find that you're working with your clients on these kind of areas, or is it something that you're like, it's nice, but it's not actually really moving the needle? We can really focus on the more substantial recovery through nutrition.
Yeah, there's a lot of media advertisements I'm seeing on social media with ketones. It seems
Mhm.
like a lot of the pro athletes are getting behind it, and the research just isn't there. Like, there's some research that shows it can support performance, but then there's others that show that it actually decreases performance. And so, from what I've seen in the research, I'm like, it is not it for me. They're also really expensive, and they taste awful. Like,
Yeah, they do.
they taste terrible. So I'm like, not super wild about them. Maybe the research will come out with more info down the line, but so far what we're seeing, I'm not team ketones. Creatine, I will say, has been one of the number one most researched supplement in multiple decades, and it's very safe to use as long as you're taking the recommended dosage, usually 3 to 4 grams a day. For endurance athletes, not as much benefit versus like if you're doing more like speed explosive running. Um, though I've been actually taking it myself since July 2024, and I've been super pleased with it. It's helped me come back to fitness because I had my third baby a year and a half ago. And so I went from like very little activity and postpartum to back into full training. And it's been really helpful for me to just bring my body composition back in terms of like lean muscle. And helping with recovery a bit. There is a fear of a little bit of weight gain just from some water retention, but it's fairly minimal. And I feel like for me personally, the benefits of just with my strength and power on the bike and my running has been outweighing any potential little bit of water weight that I might have on me. So I'm kind of a team creatine, but if it's not for everyone, but I think, for someone that wants to take it, I'm definitely not against it. And then I mentioned collagen. I think with collagen, the research is pretty strong, again, with more of those explosive sports, because that's where those muscles and those ligaments and tendons get the most stress and strain. And so they say it takes about 40 to 60 minutes for collagen to enter the bloodstream. So you want to take it about 40 to 60 minutes before you start exercising, because that's where you'll get the most blood flow into those joints, and you'll get that collagen in there to support strengthening that connective tissue.
Oh, that's awesome. So collagen in the morning, coffee before your workout.
Yes, love it.
Yeah, sounds like a plan. Well, we had sports scientist Jonah Rosner on the podcast earlier this year. It was episode 156, and we talked all about running myths, and he had the exact same advice that you just gave in terms of ketones, creatine, collagen, tart cherry juice that we talked about earlier on this episode. So I think if you're an athlete who, maybe is looking to just change something in your recovery, just adding one of these to start and seeing if you notice a difference. I'm a big believer in like how the body feels and really like reading the cues and what's going on individually, because everyone is going to be so different with how they respond in certain ways. It's a great place to be for 2025. Um, Alex, is there anything else that we didn't talk about today that you want to talk about?
Um, Other than carbs are king, I mean, that's really it. Like,
Yeah, I mean, we're in this high carb craze right now, I feel like. And it's so, I think it's so cool to see like I'm watching David Roach's YouTube videos and he's going after running, the fastest 100 miles at Western States. And he is such a big, big believer in the SIS beta fuel gel. And that
mm,
contains, I think it's about 40 grams of carbohydrates per gel.
yep.
And just leaning into taking these gels every 20 to 30 minutes and getting a certain amount of carbohydrates per hour, that 80 to 90 grams, and really focusing on that as being like the secret weapon to racing really well. And I think
Yeah,
one of the
as long as you have the gut tolerance, and I think also as long as you're
yes.
putting out that much power for that
Yeah.
long. Like for him, he's going at a pretty high effort for a really long time, and so
Mhm.
he would need that energy to in there to do that. But also he's worked for many, many, many months to train his gut to be able to tolerate that too. So it's like he's a little bit of the exception because of like what he's pushing the limits on.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't be surprised in the next 10 years with research on endurance nutrition that we start to have more gut tolerance protocols and
Yeah.
um, increasing that 60 to 90 grams of carb per hour for those longer distance endurance workouts. It's
Yeah.
really fascinating. I'm so excited to see what's to come.
I know, it's like the new super shoe out there, and it's something we
Mm-hmm.
can control as runners. And if you're someone out there kind of thinking, well, I don't know, maybe I fall a little bit on like the lower end of that, maybe the 60 grams. Like my advice is to play around with it just a little bit, like just add a
Yeah.
little bit, right? And just see
Yeah.
how you feel.
And it doesn't have to be like if you're shooting for, let's say, 80 grams of carb an hour for your marathon, maybe just
Mhm.
the first 2 hours are at 80, and then you can taper it down a little bit because usually in
Yes.
that final 10K is when the gut will go a little bit south. So you could taper it back
Mhm.
just a little. You can still take something in, but not as much. And so if you front load, so it doesn't have to be like consistently throughout the whole race, but you could adjust it if you needed um, to see how that goes. And oh, I will add this for marathoners at least. So, like in your training, what's the longest run usually? Like what, 20, 22,
It
somewhere
can
in
be
there?
20 to 22.
Somewhere in that is your longest run. So, as you're doing your long runs, so let's say you're doing a 16-mile run one weekend, fuel that as if you're running 18. And then when you do your 18 miler, fuel it as if you're running 20, 21 miles. And then when you get to that last long run, fuel it like you're doing the marathon so that you are training your gut for the marathon, even though you're not doing the full 26.2 in training.
That's great advice. And that's super helpful to understand not only how's your stomach going to react, but also hopefully you feel the power of the nutrition play
Yes.
out
Yeah.
and you feel really good.
Yeah. So kind of be a little ahead of the nutrition in terms of like your mileage.
Mhm.
Well, I guess, or hours that you're running.
Yeah, and I'm a big believer in like the front loading too. I think it's really the only way to go because you're
Mm-hmm.
going to be in deficit at some point during the race. So let's
Yeah.
try to minimize
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And the majority of people, the wheels fall off in the final 10K. So if you can be ahead of it and then go into that 10K, that's where you're going to pass people and you're going to feel like
Yeah.
$1,000,000 while everyone else is hitting the wall.
Yeah, and that's a great place to be for you individually if you're
Yeah.
passing
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
and feeling strong.
Yeah.
Um, Alex, this was great. Thank you so much for your time today. Where can our audience find you online?
Yeah, I'm at Alex Larson Nutrition on social media channels, and then my website is alexlarsonnutrition.com. I've got my website's got a blog on there, and then I also started my own podcast in January, so it's called Endurance
Cool.
Eats. So you talked about creatine. Episode 2 is all about. I had an expert on creatine research come on and talk all about creatine for endurance sports, and so And season 2 will start in July, and I will have someone that's an expert on ketones as well. So yeah, all those little hot topics, I'm like digging deep in them, but also
I
making
love
sure
it.
it's like applicable, like realistic advice for runners and endurance athletes.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. I'll link all of your information in the show notes for our audience today. Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone. I'll see you next week.